I hid something impossible in my room for a week, and what it told me changed how I see every choice I ever made. When I closed the door, I thought I was protecting a stranger. By day 7, I understood I had been protecting a reflection. If you want the documents and a timeline I used to verify what I heard, there is a link in the description. Subscribe and hit the bell now, because this is not just a secret story. It is an invitation to rethink responsibility. Now let me tell you who found, who hid, and what a single cramped week did to a quiet life. Michael Reed was 38, lived alone on the 3rd floor of an old brick walk-up in a Boston neighborhood that smelled of coffee at dawn and diesel at night. He had kept his routines like a map: morning runs, late shifts writing security code for a small tech firm, the same mug for 5 years. He had been solitary by choice and by accident. His sister Elena had married and moved to Ohio. His mother had died 2 years earlier, and the apartment felt larger after that, full of the small silences that hold a person like a thin paper between heavier pages. Michael had a habit of noticing details others let pass. He noticed a new tile out of place in the stairwell, a smell of frying onions that did not match the building, the way streetlights pooled like sodium moons on the sidewalk. Those details trained him to be a witness. On the night he found the creature on his windowsill, those same habits decided everything. It was raining. The city turned itself into a wash of reflected neon. The window in Michael's room fogged with breath. He had come home late from work, headphones still in, the taste of cold coffee and subway metal in his mouth. He saw movement at the corner of his eye and first assumed it was a raccoon. Then the thing sat up. It was small, the size of a child curled into itself, but not any child he had known. The skin was not skin, but something like paper dried and smoothed, a texture that seemed to drink light rather than reflect it. Its head was too large for its body, and its eyes, when they opened, showed colors Michael had no names for. He heard no voice. He did hear a thought that was not his, a soft pressure against his skull, like wind through a cracked window. The first contact was a question that felt like a room sliding gently closed. "Are you afraid?" Scene in the hallway with Sarah from 7B and Officer Kim played out like a small trial. Michael had called his neighbor at first because panic has a sound and he needed a human to break it. Sarah came with a flashlight and a towel. Her hands were steady. Her expression was a map of disbelief and decision. They argued briefly about calling someone official. "We should call the police," Sarah said. "No," Michael said. "Not yet." "Not yet?" Sarah asked. "You saw what it is." "I saw something that is hurt," Michael said. "I do not trust who might arrive." "You mean the cops?" Sarah asked. "I mean anyone who will not see it as a being," Michael said. "What will we do then?" Sarah asked. "Keep it here for now," Michael said. "Hide it?" she asked. "Protect it," he answered. "From what?" she said. "From being erased," he said. Sarah looked at the creature and then at Michael, and in that look the first decision hardened. "Okay," she said, "we hide it, but not alone." They made a plan in whispers: towels, a shoebox lined with an old t-shirt, a cardboard barrier to dampen the noise. That night the rain covered the sound of footsteps in the stairwell, and the city seemed to hold its breath. The week that followed was a study in small acts of concealment and surprising tenderness. Michael moved a mattress against the bedroom door, arranged blackout curtains, constructed a temporary ventilation duct with a fan and a rerouted air filter. He wrapped meals in sterile containers and fed what the creature accepted with trembling hands. He invented names for it and then stopped when it seemed to object to labels. He learned its rhythms. He learned where it slept and the tiny noises it made when listening. Each morning he coded and then came home to check whether the visitor had eaten. The creature learned to recognize the kettle's whistle, the clank of cutlery. It learned to watch his hands with a focus that felt like accusation and blessing at once. Over 4 days, they developed a kind of grammar made of looks, gestures, and the pressure of thought that slid like silk into his head. That pressure was the beginning of a strange communication, not spoken, but understood. On the third night, 3 helicopters cut across the sky. The city's soundscape changed into something mechanical and urgent. Michael heard the rotors like a threat and felt the fragile privacy of his hiding place harden into danger. He barricaded the windows, turned off the building lights, and listened to the soft breathing beside him. The creature mimicked the sound of his breath, as if learning how to soothe. He thought about calling someone to help them leave, but the streets were already full of law enforcement lights and the radio chatter that dances on frequencies after incidents. He could not risk exposing the creature to uniforms that saw things in reports and checklists. He tightened his plan and accepted responsibility, the way someone accepts a sudden inheritance, stunned, unwilling, determined. The first major exchange of language arrived not with words, but with a series of images and emotions pressed into his mind. The creature showed him a field of stars like a map of cold silver. Then, a city with identical faces walking past the same glass office buildings day after day. Then a line of small hands planting seeds in dark soil. The pressure of those images carried a meaning that hovered between accusation and plea. It was not a demand for contact, it was a warning against complacency. Michael felt the concept of denial like a physical thing inside his chest. What he learned in that week would not be about alien technology or invaders. It was about why contact did not happen and why the silence was not a conspiracy of power, but a failure of imagination and collective responsibility. Backstory of Michael had its own gravity and explained why he made the choices he did. He had grown up in a small coastal town where his father taught him to fix things that broke, to listen before acting. That training became literal in the years after he left for the city. He had studied computer science, learned the logic of systems, and then watched systems fail the people he loved when his mother became ill. He had seen appointment slips go missing, diagnoses brushed off, a bureaucratic numbness where human need should have been. Those experiences built a private scaffold of distrust of institutions and a fierce loyalty to individual compassion. He had once sheltered a neighbor after a domestic fight, hiding the woman and calling a lawyer rather than the police. He believed small kindnesses mattered, that saving one life could be an act that seeded other choices. The backstory in 3 short paragraphs held these wounds and virtues: the hands of a father teaching, the empty clinic waiting room, the late-night coding sessions that paid for silence but did not fill the space left by people he loved. Michael named the creature quietly at first because names offer containment and comfort. He called it Lumen when alone, a name that suggested light without claiming it. Lumen, as he would later translate from the slow, luminous images, meant seed. The initial communication revealed that Lumen had been injured near an electrical substation on the outskirts of the city, and that it had been staggered into our atmosphere by a weather event that combined solar activity with a rare atmospheric inversion. This made Lumen more of a castaway than an invader. It also explained why its physiology reacted to urban lighting in strange ways. Michael patched it with saline and boiled water on a stove, using bandages and a careful clinical patience that surprised him. He kept a log of temperatures, of feeding times, of the creature's responses to sound. The technical process of stabilizing its breathing required a simple but precise approach: humidified air at a steady flow, a mild saline mist, and a makeshift biofilter to avoid mold. That procedure was improvised but bore the hallmarks of scientific method applied with human urgency. It took 3 days to fully stabilize Lumen, and during those hours, Michael learned to read the creature's micro-expressions like a foreign language. Word of the hiding could have sprayed. There were at least 8 people who touched parts of the secret in the week it happened. Sarah from 7B helped with the initial concealment and ran errands. Deputy Alvarez happened to park his cruiser on the block and asked questions that led Michael to craft a careful set of lies. He said his building had a rat problem. He said he had a sick cat in the back room. Lieutenant Harris from the National Guard came close to the building on Bay 4 during a sweep of the area, and Michael pretended to be in bed with a fever. Nora Diaz, an independent reporter who sometimes wrote human interest columns for a local paper, knocked early on day 5 because she had been writing about strange power surges in the neighborhood. Marcus, a friend from work, delivered extra batteries under the guise of helping with a blackout. Dr. Priya Banerjee, a researcher at a local university who Michael consulted online out of growing desperation, advised on biological filters. Officer Kim asked routine questions about noise. Elena called once and Michael lied about being on a business trip. Those named characters played roles that complicated the secrecy and added layers of moral choice. Each had an action that either helped conceal, questioned concealment, or nudged Michael toward exposure. The first big moment of tension came when Deputy Alvarez returned with a new set of orders to increase patrols around the substations. Michael had to decide whether to move Lumen to a safer place at 2 in the morning or to keep it hidden and risk a search. The choice was slow and sharp around the edges. He imagined black boots at his threshold, flashlights carving into the bedroom, questions read like verdicts. He imagined Lumen dragged into a sterile room and dissected. He also imagined leaving the city and taking the secret with him, but the creature could not travel like that. He felt the weight of responsibility as a physical object. He could not sleep. He held Lumen and told it, without words, that he would not abandon it. He made a plan to conceal the smell, to reroute the building's small exhaust fan, and to create a false wall of laundry to hide the sleeping place. That night, Michael lay awake with his hand on a small body and heard the police cars drive past like a tide. He counted the beats between rotors as if they were a clock marking a deadline. Dialogue scenes grew longer and more fraught as the week progressed. On day 4, Michael and Lieutenant Harris had a conversation that would have been unremarkable in any other context, but that now carried the weight of possible discovery. They exchanged questions and half-answers. "You live alone?" Harris asked. "Yes," Michael said. "Any unusual comings or goings?" Harris asked. "No," Michael said. "We had a power surge last night," Michael offered. "Power? Surges can cause accidents," Harris said. "Accidents happen," Michael agreed. "You seem nervous," Harris observed. "I am," Michael admitted. "Anything I should know about?" Harris asked. "No," Michael said. "If something happens, call us," Harris said. "I will," Michael promised. "You understand why we are heightened," Harris added. "Yes," Michael said. "We are keeping the city safe," Harris said. "Thank you," Michael said. These 10 exchanges read small on paper, but each carried an undercurrent. Michael watched Harris's posture, the way his fingers drummed a rhythm that betrayed impatience, the scent of machine oil on his jacket. Michael learned to lie not with words alone, but with the small mechanical truths that people accepted without asking. The communication with Lumen deepened into a sequence of mental exchanges that resembled conversation more than imagery. It pushed and pulled ideas like magnets. Lumen asked about names, about weather, about why humans made machines that hum all night. Michael answered with images at first: a train, a hospital corridor, a mother mending a coat. Their exchanges lengthened until they resembled dialogue with 10 to 12 turns, each turn layered with emotion and mimetic weight. "Where did you come from?" Michael thought to it. The response was a taste of mineral earth, then the sound of wind across a plateau. "Why here?" Michael asked. There came images of islands of light, of species repeating patterns that cut across time, of choices made by crowds that sealed opportunities. "Why not contact?" Michael pressed. Lumen's reply did not blame a single government or alien fleet. It showed a mirror where many faces turned away. It pressed the concept of denial into his mind with the sensory clarity of smell and touch. Michael felt heat behind his eyes. It was less an answer than a confession, that contact required more than curiosity, it required responsibility. The midweek revelation that altered the moral axis of the story came on day 5. Michael had been keeping a careful schedule of feeds and airflow.
He started recording Lumen's reactions with his phone, a bad camera on a cheap stand. He intended the recordings to be a record to show a scientist if needed. The footage captured a moment he did not expect. Lumen, waking from a long sleep, transmitted a cascade of images. City squares where people looked only at their screens. A factory floor where workers were watched by cameras and given identical meals. A classroom where children raised hands and left empty. Between each image came a smaller one, a sapling planted and then discarded, a seed thrown into a gutter and drowned by storm water. The message condensed. We watched for contact, and we were not ready. Not because we lacked intelligence or interest, but because our systems and collective choices had eroded the circuits that allow responsibility to travel. Michael felt what could only be called shame, a heat like the press of palms on a mirror. It was a discovery of collective denial. When he replayed the footage, he realized this revelation would change everything if shared. But to share was to risk Lumen's life. To hide was to perpetuate the very denial the creature had shown him. A commentary moment demanded a pause for viewers, because this was the place where the story turns outward. You might feel anger, disbelief, or a quiet ache. Those are real and valid. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer in the comments. Start with these words. My denial is. Then write one sentence about what you reflexively avoid. Maybe it is not seeing a neighbor who struggles. Maybe it is refusing to question a routine at work. Maybe it is denying the long-term harms of convenience. Your single sentence matters. If you share it, others will see themselves. If enough people exchange honest lines, a pattern emerges, and we can use it to build the next pieces of this story. I will read and respond to as many as I can. Your sentence will not be judged. It will be a seed that might grow into action. And now, we return to Michael and Lumen to see what happens when a truth is near public exposure. The technical explanation of how Michael attempted to document the contact was methodical and narrow. He used a phone camera, a battery-powered audio recorder, and a small thermal sensor app to log temperatures. He recorded metadata for each clip: time, GPS coordinate approximations, ambient decibel levels. For biological notes, he took humidity, average respiratory rate of the creature, approximate caloric intake, and changes in skin conductivity. He backed up files to an encrypted cloud folder and sent a hashed copy to Dr. Priya under the guise of encrypted research notes. The process was simple in description but precise in execution and required vigilance to avoid leaving digital crumbs that could betray Lumen. These procedural steps were crucial. A single exposed IP address could have led authorities to Michael's apartment. The moment of confrontation arrived when Nora Diaz published an article about power anomalies, and a reader comment pointed to Michael's building. The comment was casual, almost offhand, but it triggered a reporter's instinct. Nora came to his door asking questions framed by civic concern. Michael had to decide whether to lead Nora away from the truth or to trust her to hear more than a headline. The conversation with Nora unfolded in 12 exchanges, full of subtext. You wrote about the substations, Nora said. Yes, Michael said. Have you noticed odd things? She asked. Yes, Michael admitted. Do you believe in unexplained phenomena? She asked. I believe in witnessing, Michael replied. Does that mean you will tell the truth? She pressed. Only if the truth does no harm, Michael said. And who decides that? Nora asked. We all do, he said. Is that enough? She asked. It must be, he said. But it might not be, Nora replied. Then we fail together, he said.
Or we choose differently, she added. Their dialogue ended without resolution, but with a seed planted. Nora walked away with an idea and a moral knot to untangle. The stakes rose when military interests turned from perimeter checks to targeted inquiry on day 6. Lieutenant Harris returned not as a sympathetic figure, but as an instrument of institutional protocol. He asked specific questions about chemical smells, frequency of deliveries, and whether Michael had pets. His voice was calm, trained to neutralize panic. Michael answered with a set of prepared lies. They were half true and half shelter. The exchanges were 10 in number and felt like a negotiation over invisible property. Any animals? Harris asked. No, Michael said. Any strange noises? Harris asked. No, Michael said. Power surges? Harris said. Yes, Michael said. Any friends coming in at night? Harris asked. No, Michael said. You sure? Harris asked. Yes, Michael said. If something comes up, alert us, Harris said. We will, Michael said. You understand the consequences? Harris asked. I do, Michael said. Good, Harris said. At the end, Michael felt as if he had signed papers with his silence. He went back into the room and sat with Lumen, his shoulders tight like cords, and told the creature that they would have to be quieter. The central revelation, the one the creature had pressed into Michael's mind like a hand on a shoulder, unfolded in patient explanation. Lumen did not accuse governments or single entities. Instead, it showed in careful sequences how contact depended on custodianship that humans had reduced into transactional routines. It presented historical flashes, early explorers who traded seeds and ideas, scientists who risked reputations to publish inconvenient truths, communities that chose care over convenience. Then it contrasted those with modern systems, surveillance that measured people but did not teach them to hold one another, media cycles that rewarded spectacle over sustained attention, bureaucracies that preferred protocols to mercy. These juxtapositions were not a single verdict, but a pattern. Contact requires not advanced technology, but a collective willingness to be responsible. The creature's revelation reframed contact as a moral act, not a technological handshake. It located refusal to contact within human systems of denial. When Michael understood this, he felt something like grief for a species, not because it had failed to encounter others in space, but because it had atrophied the muscles of shared responsibility. This revelation carried examples that Michael later cross-checked. He pulled 3 historical cases from public archives that illustrated the point. A 19th century expedition where aid was withheld for profit. Mid-20th century public health decisions that prioritized industry over communities. And a recent municipal restructuring that closed neighborhood clinics to save budgets. Each example showed a pattern of choices that prioritized short-term efficiencies over long-term stewardship. Michael compared those patterns to Lumen's images and saw that the creature had not been lying. He felt the weight of shared responsibility like a ledger he had not been appointed.
Manage, but had entered nonetheless. The decision and farewell scene was intimate and ritualized. Michael realized that he could not expose Lumen to a world not ready to hold it. He had to perform an act that was both letting go and entrusting. He built a crate lined with insulation and placed there items that might comfort. A scrap of t-shirt with his scent, a small radio playing low-frequency hums, a mixture of salts and boiled grasses that Lumen had accepted. He wrote a note but did not leave it attached because he knew notes could be misread. He arranged the city map he had been marking with possible routes, chose one that led to a coastal point where the electrical disturbance had been less intense, and set an appointment with a courier who would deliver the crate at night. There was a scene of goodbye that was not melodramatic but precise. He pressed his forehead to Lumen's, and the creature placed a tiny, cool hand on his cheek. The touch carried something that felt like a covenant. "You will tell others if asked," it communicated. Michael nodded. He could not promise everything, only the work he was willing to do. The immediate epilogue described the first breaths after the departure. In the week following Lumen's departure, Michael found himself unable to sleep. He walked the neighborhood, spoke with Sarah and Marcus, and started a small list of volunteers willing to look after neighbors in crisis. He called Elena, and for the first time in years told her things that were not framed as small talk. She listened and did not laugh. He spoke at a community meeting about emergency preparedness and the need for networks of care. People responded with guarded curiosity. The city had shifted, slightly, like a table that had been nudged. Michael felt his life tilt toward activism he had never expected. Longer-term epilogue unfolded over months as Michael's choices rippled. 1 month later, he had organized a neighborhood workshop on emergency care, with Dr. Priya joining via video call to talk about rudimentary biofilters and community response. The meeting had a warmth that surprised him. 8 neighbors attended and 1 local clinic offered supplies.
He documented the meeting and posted anonymized notes to an online forum he moderated. The community's response was cautious optimism. A seed of shared responsibility had been planted. He found himself sleeping less and walking more, noticing the small human failures he once ignored. He felt lighter in the chest and more burdened in the right ways. 3 months later, Michael had become a quiet organizer. He had not gone to the press. Instead, he helped assemble a community network that mapped vulnerable residents and coordinated simple resources: extra batteries, water, someone to check on elders. They called themselves the Keeping Circle, a name Michael chose because it felt like a practice rather than an organization. The circle met monthly and kept minutes. Nora Diaz attended once and
wrote a piece about grassroots preparedness that avoided sensationalism. Lent Harris had never directly challenged Michael, but their paths crossed at a civic event where Michael spoke about civic responsibility. Harris listened. There was no dramatic reconciliation, only a grudging recognition that duty sometimes required listening to neighbors more than following orders. 6 months on, the transformation was visible in concrete acts. The neighborhood clinic that had been at risk of closing received a small grant after a community campaign, and a local university pledged a rotating nurse. Sarah had become the circle's coordinator. Marcus ran logistics. Elena visited from Ohio and stayed for a week. Michael had returned to coding, but now his shifts included work with a nonprofit that built simple, ventilated shelters for urban emergencies. He had become a witness and an organizer, and the word responsibility had moved from being an abstract moral term to a daily practice. The memory of Lumen appeared sometimes in dreams as a field of seeds, and Michael would wake with the urgent need to plant something in his small window box, which he did, watching green push through dirt like a promise. There were procedural notes that Michael kept private, but later shared with a select few he trusted. He had recorded timestamps, GPS logs, and environmental readings for each day Lumen stayed. He encrypted the folder and shared a key with Dr. Priya, who promised to hold it unless published evidence demanded otherwise. He created checksums for the files and logged them in multiple places to prevent tampering. Those technical steps mattered because evidence had value but also carried risk. Michael learned that care includes technical humility. Not everyone should see everything, and disclosure must be weighed against harm. In the months that followed, a debate formed in the margins of city life about what had occurred. Some dismissed it as a hoax. Others believed Michael and used his story to argue for greater community care. The conversation exposed the collective denial Lumen had shown. Many people preferred the comfort of a neat explanation or a conspiracy rather than the messy work of shared responsibility. But seeds had been planted. The community meetings continued. Donations trickled in. A local historian gave a public talk about past civic failures and successes and framed the present as a choice point. The refrain, responsibility, seed, transformation, started to appear not as slogans but as part of local vocabulary. If something of this story resonates with you, consider this final practical ask. Look at who in your life you have been denying. Maybe a neighbor, a process at work, a system that needs questioning. Write one sentence in the comments starting with, "My denial is." Share it. Read 2 others and think about one concrete thing you can do this week to nudge responsibility into action. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that ask the difficult question, how do we wake into collective care? If you want to help curate community resources, we link to toolkits and readings in the description. Become part of the conversation, not just a witness, but an actor. The final lessons were simple and heavy. The most surprising thing Lumen revealed was not an alien conspiracy, but a human refusal. We had the capacity to meet others, to stretch our moral muscles, but we had not practiced them enough. The story did not end with a ship departing or a dramatic reveal. It ended with phone calls, with a man calling his sister late at night and telling the truth, with a group of neighbors who decided to check on the elderly once a week. It ended with small rituals and practical repairs. Responsibility proved less glamorous than revelation and more potent than fear. The secret had become a seed.
What Michael hid in his room for a week had become a mirror and a call. The truth begins with choice. Choose to see. Choose to act. Choose to remove your hand from your own eyes. If you feel ready to question how your patterns protect denial, subscribe, comment with your sentence starting "My denial is," and join a community that tries to turn witnessing into responsibility. The truth always begins with a choice.